Welcome back. President Hage Geingob has reiterated his stance that Namibia will no longer be exporting raw materials, saying the country is dedicated to improving the sustainability of its extractive industry. Geingob was speaking at the opening of the European Union and Namibia Business Forum happening in Brussels, Belgium on Tuesday. Geingob stressed that the decision to minimize the exportation of raw materials is also aimed at developing local processing, refining and recycling capacity in Namibia. Joining us with more on this is trade analyst Rodney Hoab. And good morning, Mr. Hoab, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Taswa. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this morning?
All is well.
All right. Hypothetically speaking, if the minimization and the discontinuation of the exportation of raw materials gets implemented in the near future, what sort of impact will this have on the country?
It is a very good question, Dabo, and I would like to greet the Namibian nation at large as well. The question that we have to ask about the significance of the ban is, shall this include the benign industries like oil that we are pursuing as a country? And will this oil not be one of the raw materials that we are anticipating, or will this be divided in different segments of minerals? Other thing that I can add is, when you impose a ban on a specific mineral or raw material, we should consider that there is a need for value chain creation, and will other sectors of industrialization also be part of that? Who will manage this industrial as an institutional capacity? Will Ministry of Mines be the one driving it? As I can see, in this Ministry of Mines, the last time we checked, their coordination of industrialized sectors and the segments of having mineral segments, the two of them do not necessarily coordinate. We've seen this with existing industries. This mandate is specifically carried by the Ministry of Trade. Therefore, there has to be clear focus on who will be driving the institutional mandate for this. Currently, and the current capacity is something that we can discuss on a different channel. And then I also want to ask that when we are planning to enrich, is this to enrich a few players in the sector? Or, in my opinion, government should step up its focus on investment, on guarantees, and the state participation into the mineral sector as well. Because when the current companies that are existing in the space of minerals and mineral exports, they will enjoy an isolated monopoly when this ban is passed. Thank you.
All right. Are there perhaps any potential consequences or challenges associated with halting the export of raw materials?
Yes, there are. There will be policy challenges, and also the question about how it will reflect on investment attraction of Namibia. The questions we have to ask is, how long will it last? And what are the conditions that we look at? What do we want to achieve? What are these timelines? What are in the circuit of, or the domain of this ban? What are the positives or the highlights or the milestones that we are placing on that? Or do we just throw it up and say we will consider this just as a policy framework, and then we'll come back to it if consideration of future stock is made about, or monitoring and evaluation is done about its success? Those are the elements that we have to consider. One cannot just pass a framework. When you pass a framework or a ban, you have to also hold yourself accountable and say, when I impose the ban, these are the measures, and you must also consult with the right industry stakeholders to say, these are the precise measures that I will achieve when the ban is done. A ban should not just come with the absolute reason of nationalization and say, this is for the benefit of the Namibian people. But there are other constructors, trade, economic, global, industrial, all these factors are to be considered, and they should be done in consultation with all the existing laws, trade and the laws of the country. Article 144 of the Namibian Constitution speaks about the WTO rules that we have exceeded into the country. What do we pay special attention to what they say? Because there are concerns that it will violate our WTO rules as well.
All right. And how will the discontinuation of the exportation of raw materials affect international trade relations?
I would be blunt, but respectfully speaking, it will go against the WTO laws. But But rare earth minerals are also lined up in other countries for bans in different countries, Australia, EU, and most of these are usually done in alignment with sensitivity in terms of the quantity or the quality or the percentage of it. And if one can, I can say this way, Ministry of Mines has the ability to handle, does Ministry of Mines have the ability to handle a specific segment and to monitor this segment? Therefore, I can say that international relations can become a little bit tainted if we don't pay special focus to what we are doing as a country. When you have a domestic law, you should also consider the international relations or the international demand that is related or linked, or the international trade part of it that is related or linked to the mineral you are banning. Because minerals have a complete value chain that has to tie in from one end to the next. And then also what I would like to ask is, in terms of the international community, what we call a raw mineral, in the definition of it, may not be the rare earth mineral. We have to find out and pinpoint definitions. What are the definitions that other role players, other countries are applying? For example, you pass a definition in Namibia. How is that definition across the board benchmarked with another country? What is the degree or the level of processing of these raw materials that you want to accrue? Considering that even within the region, within SADC region, you have other stakeholders that need cross-border value chain. At what level do they want this mineral processed, and how do they identify this? It is something that clearly needs a feasibility before it can just proceed.
All right. Now, speaking of raw materials, even if we stopped exporting our raw materials in the near future, is there any natural resources left to be exported? And if so, if you could perhaps just highlight a few of those.
Thank you, Tapawa. All natural resources are suppressed under commodity price volatilities, meaning this is one of the most sensitive segments of global trade. We know that when there is a fluctuation in price or a depreciation in the price of commodities, we are highly affected by this. Yes, if we stop exporting raw materials, there will be natural resources, in essence, that, how many do we have in the country? Do we have enough? Do we have sufficient? From my analysis, we can consider that most of the major raw materials that we have in Namibia are already under a sort of a beneficiation regime. The country has already outlined policies previously about your uranium, your zinc, copper. These are industries that are enjoying industrial input or industrial facilitation. However, mineral beneficiation in Africa doesn't attract much foreign direct investment. As I previously said, that commodity prices fall back on foreign direct investment appetite for raw materials. If we look at the reflection and the picture about Africa, is that we become overly defensive in our policy and our approach, but such defensiveness should also be guided by our flexibility about working and sitting down with the investors and sharing the risk commonly. There's a common risk within the mineral and processing sector. There are countries such as Australia and South America that is more abundant in terms of raw earth minerals. Does Africa have them? There are certain countries which are put on the map for this. You have your DR Congo with the copper, the tantalite, and such minerals. Namibia, in a nutshell, our only top exports in the mineral space is like zinc and diamonds, and seemingly we are not even very high in terms of gold, and we are not even very proactive in terms of lithium sector yet. Our lithium sector is quite very small at the moment. South America plays a very huge role in that. Therefore, we need to look at the industrial side the investment side of it. If we say we have these rare earth minerals, what are they defined as? What impact do we make in the world? Where is our position in terms of export? How are they affected by commodity prices? Yes, we do know that products like lithium do fetch a high market value when it is processed. However, we have to look at what are the current deposits that are available. What are the opportunities that can be created without creating a all-out monopoly for, say, one or two companies, and these players become the primary domain of our dependence. What happens when these companies, when they shut down and go back to their countries? Do we sit now with licenses that we have to sell on the black market so that only people can benefit? All these are flexibilities we have to look at. And I have to mention that we have a very underdeveloped extraction and mineral breakdown or classification sector, meaning that our classification in terms of if we extract one ore of a product, the classification of it, one ore of a product in one stone or a boulder, you can find copper, zinc, iron, and all these. Countries like China have a very advanced or a mature mineral breakdown strategy, meaning that they can extract different resources from one product and still put it to an effective use. Reason being that they have an advanced industrial and extractive regimes. Do we have that? This means that most of our minerals are actually going to waste because of our classification deficiency. We should look at that extraction efficiency that we have to build up. Countries like China, they don't create policies around, I would believe, one tiny mineral sector, but because once it's liberal within the domain of its trade and its trade partners, it means this liberal policy of trade within itself and its immediate neighbors is allowing for the industries to thrive. When we, for example, take a lithium product, do we have someone in the region which will produce a battery? Do we have someone who has the other ion minerals? Do we have someone who has the other gel or the plastic component? That is how, literally, a segment of a battery is formed. When we don't have this, then it means that we are geographically disadvantaged and isolated for us just to think in a vacuum or a space of a closed domain. Therefore, we have to explore or expand on these areas of thinking as well.
All right. Basically leading me to my next question. Does Namibia have what it takes to process raw materials? Do we have the equipment and the plants to process these materials?
We can if the focus is correct. But currently, if we can see in the fora of business and economics, the domain or the frontier of business pioneering projects like green hydrogen is taking more precedence even over a carbon-driven market. Reason being, we are too shy on investment industrial policy. We are too shy about carbon-related sectors. We are too shy about promoting our daily bread and butter issues, meaning that our economic focus is more about what is appeasing or pleasing to the European market, to the donors, to the green investors, to the green bonds. Our eyes are more adjusting policies to accommodate or to be pleasant in the space of green energy, in green ideology. Is that a mismatch? Yes, it is a mismatch. Economies that have produced a lot of carbon footprint are the ones who are spearheading those programs, or should I say campaigns, based on from a point of conviction. Reason being, they have been having industrial sector since the start of the industrial sector or the industrial age. They have been part and parcel of driving a lot of carbon emissions globally. But all of a sudden, we have inherited a set of conviction that we feel like we have to drive a green energy campaign. We are not yet at that level. Africa is barely below 2% of global emissions, and our threat or the hazardous places, your prosperity, which is the most industrial sector in Namibia, is a very clear, lucid sky outlook, meaning that we are not that much intensive in carbon production. Or if our focus for such minerals is to generate revenue, we should approach it aggressively. It's not a policy that you just lay aside and come back to it to visit it, putting it amongst one of your list or middle priorities. It should be a primary, a paramount, and highly focused area of industrial focus. Then we will move forward. One of the other areas that we have neglected, for example, is nuclear fusion, nuclear energy. We know that the people in UK and other countries took a step in pioneering that small modular power reactors with nuclear power, or SMRs. Our stance and our driven ambition in that sector has been very poor, considering or comparing to other countries that is putting to use their nuclear abilities. We as Namibia is a fourth uranium exporting country in the world. Hence, we are contradicting ourselves with our industrial capacity or knowledge in that space, that we are just taking a backseat and allowing other countries to tramp upon our abilities to be the global driver in this. In that we are complaining about energy. We could have been the ones that are sitting on the same table as South Africa and the big economies are exploring their nuclear ambitions. We are not, because we don't take this as a priority. We are handed down a priority list from outside, and because of donations and because of additional given funds, or that we can receive freely, we are literally having our hands open and say we are spearheading green hydrogen in Namibia. Hence, our energy focus from that is not the same as what we would benefit from the other sectors. I must respectfully speak and say that, is that a topic that fits? Yes, it does fit, because it is a taxpayer that has to put in a form of a bargain level with their taxpayer fund money, because we have so much allocated time within 365 days of a year to push at a national level certain projects of national priority. And I think we should do more to put about 5 policies and focus on all of them at the same time with the same pace or energy or propensity. Thank you.
All right. Now, Rodney, what are some of the measures you think should be taken in order to ensure a smooth transition for industries heavily dependent on raw material exportations?
It will reflect in our capacity to create employment. It will reflect in our capacity to ease the Gini coefficient or the inequality. These are some of the measures. If we want to see how effective a policy is, let us look at its intensity of jobs that it has created. Let us look at the tenacity of social involvement and the value chains that are created in that sector. If these do not reflect the true image of that policy, then it means that we have to take a step back and to consult with the public and the relevant industry stakeholders and do stock of such a policy. That is the only way that we can measure or see how the raw material industry is having progress. One of smooth transition only exists if it is a 3-legged approach, which is the public service, which is the civil society, and the key in the industry stakeholders. Currently, there is a mismatch, or there's a step back in our ability to raise equities for certain key projects. There's a step in our ability to raise guarantees. There's a step back in the ability to raise incentives for new industry players. We currently do not have a fully flexible special economic zone policy. The EPZ policy will be busy being passed out up until its maturity stage of 2025. And then our industrial integrity as a country, if we rate it from a scale of 1 to 10, we have enough trust in that sense. How did we perform in our proposed, triple P policy or the public-private partnership policy? Were the projects that we lifted off, were they effective? If they were not effective, first we should sharpen on the policies that we have neglected to use that experience to build a new mineral policy. And I think we should step in that direction of accountability.
All right. Now, what will happen to foreign investors that have been exporting these raw materials in the country? How will they be affected?
It is a dilemma or a point of, probably risk increase. Risk may increase in certain sectors. Why? Because, yes, a few companies may benefit from such a ban. However, what happens if you become so much constricted by more laws being imposed on you? If you are not able to function within the parameters of the laws that come along with it, will they be restrictive or will they be more permissive? From certain experience of industry stakeholders is that there's a wider perception about everything. And if our reliance is not on empirical data and feasibility study, we will fall back on a narrative of hearsay, meaning that we are purely driven by emotions, we are driven by feelings. As government institutions, we are just reflecting and say, we have given you this impunity, we want you to behave this way, we want you to act this way. That is different. Industries require the government to have the same level of expertise as them as industry is facing. They want government to understand and be a partner and to carry the risk that they are also facing. Hence, this can be a dilemma. In many cases, we have seen that the expectations from the government and the expectations from the industry are two different colliding paradigms. Industry is operating on profit-making and survival. Therefore, we should look at that.
Is it cheap to keep raw materials in the country or even processing it in the long run?
I would say, looking at the formidable experience about some sectors, and if we ever sit down with them and discuss about affordability or cheapness, is we look at the production cost of many items that are manufactured in Namibia. If we do a personal reflection for myself, and I look at production costs, looking at labor laws, looking at tax or revenue, lack of incentives, lack of manufacturing incentives. If we look at the distance that one has to cover, if we look at the petrol cost or the transport cost, electricity cost, water availability, water cost, is it really something that we can call cheap? In my personal view, and then lastly to add the volatility between the South African rand and the US dollar, I don't think the production cost in Namibia is that attractive to qualify in the segment of cheap. Yes, we can do a little bit more. We should spend more time creating that environment of industrial facilitation, lower production cost. Is lower production cost will also be positive for the country's revenue because we will be attracting more manufacturing and then we'll be having more jobs. It's also a trade-off. Once you make the environment good, especially when it comes to infrastructure, water infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, let me make a suggestive, point. If we consider Wolfish Bay, for example, is one of Namibia's most industrial towns having affordable infrastructure for cheap development, for cheap processing of minerals of any sort. The electricity cost, the water cost, and the land cost, and then blend that with Windhoek. I don't believe we fall in the domain of cheap production cost. We are way a little bit far from that. And then our policies and incentives to have cheap water, cheap electricity, and cheap land, it is the only thing that can guarantee us a very competitive edge in the market, even for rare earth minerals. We considering also additionally for green investment, they require this set of incentives, and we should be more very proactive.
Mr. Rodney, perhaps if you could just provide us with examples of countries or regions that have successfully transitioned away from exporting raw materials.
It would be surprising to call some countries. Europe is one of them, but their cap or limit on that has been 15% of the rare earth minerals, and their classifications depends also on what type of minerals, what level of processing, and all these do play a certain role. Countries like Australia as well, I think we're busy working on such policies, and it is a global phenomenon. However, these countries are being very careful in imposing these statutes and not trying to destroy investor confidence. However, some countries don't really have a strong presence of global mining, how can I say, or put it, global mining companies within their territory. Whereas Africa needs the presence of these companies to establish its infrastructure, to help them with roads, to help them with mining, skills that is transferred, machinery and equipment to be brought in. Most of the other countries around the world already have a plethora or a very wealthy market or exposure of minerals, of processing, of additional raw materials. And for them to impose this, they have already done their groundwork and they know that once they impose the policies, it will succeed. That is the competition that we are facing, but especially South America and lithium also has been one area that they have been very defensive. Zimbabwe, I can add to that. We are still, in Africa, we pass the policies with a very silent tone without erupting global attention.
Now, looking at some of the benefits that you mentioned earlier, taking into consideration that more jobs will be created if this is the case, talk to us about some of the skills and labor costs. Will this be expensive for Namibia? Can this be afforded?
The labor skills will be refined when you have an industry that is taking lead. For example, Botswana with the diamond sector, which is up to 30% of the GDP. They consider it as a fruitful value chain, which means that the government is aligned with the vision, the private sector is aligned with the vision, the members of civil society is aligned with the vision. When they form a coherent structure around the diamond industry, it also permeates down to the plumber, it permeates down to the street vendor, it permeates down to the transport sector, and it overlaps widely into the provisions or the values of the other sectors as well. Namibia has a very dynamic economy where competitiveness spreads across different industries. We don't have a focus area. If you mention lithium, lithium becomes so small considering the view of diamonds, meaning that some of the sectors, as we evolve our economy, even with our oil vision, some of these sectors will face a serious risk of survival. Why? Because Namibia is so very dynamic. Namibia is a very competitive country to be based in. Where exactly would you fit in lithium sector? What will happen in these sectors? Abuse is imminent because it is not within our national vision. It is not within the confines of our priority sectors. If we say Tandalite or Tandalam, which is processed maybe, or vanadium, which is processed in some of these exclusive or smaller mines, and we pass the policy, we can easily come to the conclusion that they will suffocate in silence and then close off without raising a serious stir within the society, and close off, and the investors will be shipped out next morning. Then our focus will forget about it and shift over to the fishing sector. Jobs in that sense they won't be focused in a job area where you are specialized over many years. You'll have to adapt yourself to be a plumber today, to be a gold merchant tomorrow, to be a diamond polisher the day after, to be a vanadium miner the other day, and then come back to the uranium sector. When we build an ecosystem of business, even within the confines of a special economic zone, we should house a value chain from point A up to perhaps A, B, C, and D, meaning that you're combining all these incentives as the product flows from one stage to the next without imposing strict measures of VAT and taxes, which is currently one of our biggest screams, is that we should tax more, tax more, tax more. However, taxing too much heavily, taxing itself is a measure to expand or contract an economy, expand or contract industrial development, meaning when you pass tax breaks, you are allowing a certain sector to grow. However, our officials, when we have discussions with them, their only means is what money do we make from it. We don't look or consider at the future value of growing these sectors.
Thank you
we
so
don't look
much.
at the future.
Thank you.
That's what I basically wanted to add.
All right, Mr. Hoyab, unfortunately, that's all the time we had for you, but thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Deborah.
All right. Rodney Hoyab, who is a trade analyst, talking to us, giving us his analysis on the president's sentiments as he alluded or reiterated his stance that Namibia will no longer be exporting raw materials. And he said this at the EU-Namibia Business Forum that's currently taking place in Belgium.